If you get scammed by Logan Paul, you deserve it. Gonna be honest, if you're getting scammed by Logan Paul, you deserve it. There's always gonna be just a few more idiots willing to throw their life savings away on an obvious scam. I saw this all over my last video, and it's an extremely common response every time any sort of scam happens. While some will target and disavow the masterminds stealing people's money, a second group targets the victims, implying they're stupid or despicably naive. And honestly, at first it makes total sense. If you hand your life savings to Logan Paul, of all people, after everything he's done, well then maybe you just needed to learn the lesson personally. Maybe you just couldn't be helped. Except, it's never quite that simple, really. This logic assumes that scams only work because victims are stupid, instead of the fact that the masterminds that run these scams are experts at manipulating people, garnering people's trust only to brutally screw them over. This logic assumes that you're too smart to fall for the trap. It makes sense, but only at first, until you start looking a little bit deeper. So let's take that deeper look together. Let's look back at some of the biggest scams in history, some old, some new, and see how these scams work, how they trick people into signing away all of their money, who the victims are, why they fall for it, and ultimately who this sort of discourse benefits, and why that might be a little more sinister and intentional than you might think, all in an effort to answer the question, do you deserve to be scammed? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To see how these scams trick people, we need to go through a few case studies. Beginning with a philanthropic shining star.
The guy you see next to me is the most generous billionaire in the world, and I found him.
Hi, my name is Sam, and this is my story.
Sam seems like a swell guy until you understand that he was perpetrating billions of dollars of fraud behind the scenes and partaking in some questionable levels of degeneracy. Not every single scam is going to be perpetrated by someone you already have preconceived notions about. Generally, the CEOs present themselves kind of like Sam does. Good, altruistic, kind-hearted, normal people. It works really well for Sam. He presents himself as awkward and maybe a little bit uncomfortable with his own spotlight. His presence is the definition of disarming, and that's why this act feels so genuine, and that's why people fell for it. And unfortunately, behind the mask was a shark. See, regardless of your amount of due diligence, at some point you're gonna have to trust whatever you're putting your money into. You buy the apple juice at the store labeled apple juice, hoping that it's actually apple juice, but it could very well be a more sinister liquid. Rather than us blindly making assumptions, we actually pick up on a myriad of different signals to determine whether something is worth taking the leap on, but the signals themselves are often dubious. What Sam's doing, by acting as both the CEO and a spokesman, is acting as a physical representation of his company, FTX. Human-to-human connection remains the greatest way to persuade people, and rather than them having to buy into a faceless corporation, they just had to buy into this guy and his persona. People who trusted Sam trusted the company he founded and the products he was selling. Similarly, there are millions of fans of someone like Logan Paul, and many of these people will trust him enough to literally give him their money, regardless of his history. We as humans significantly overestimate our ability to tell the difference between a swindler and someone genuine. Despite your greatest efforts as an investor, you would never really be able to know what Sam was truly perpetrating, because it was never on the books. FTX was committing mass amounts of accounting fraud, misrepresenting the numbers and their profits to hide the fact that they weren't doing as well as people thought they were. They were making extremely risky financial moves using customer funds, which had led them to being insolvent at a time when a cascade of customers began withdrawing funds. You never really had a chance to discover any of this. You could do all the due diligence in the world, you could read all the papers, you can even have a little bit of insider information, but the only people who could know this would be Sam and his cronies. That's the thing. It's not really about diligence or intelligence, it's about cynicism. The best way to protect yourself from a scam is to be a cynic. Never believe in everything and always doubt, which, when it comes to cryptocurrencies, is probably the safest bet anyways. But the problem is that when you're making the safe bet, you're playing protectively. While you're sitting on the sidelines twiddling your thumbs, other people are taking risks, making money. That exact fear of missing out is what drives people to make rash investments. They become convinced that by not participating, they're being left behind. When it comes to crypto, there's so much propaganda and marketing behind it. Everywhere you turn, it's crypto, 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 Bitcoin doing this, the blockchain, revolutionary technology.
So what's up, Bitcoin?
Man goes from nothing to a crypto millionaire, maybe a crypto billionaire. How can you not feel pressured to do something with crypto?
Look, I need to know what I stand to win.
Everything.
How's that?
You stand to win everything, call it.
The problem lies in how inaccessible these investments actually are. I've done my fair share of research around crypto, and even then, I would classify my understanding as barely scratching the surface. Despite this, I know for a fact that people with less understanding than me will confidently throw their money into cryptocurrency because they're hearing all this positive buzz about it. Plus, if everyone else is doing it, it's gotta be the right thing to do. Look, Larry David is in a Super Bowl commercial promoting FTX. Larry wouldn't do me like that.
And I'm never wrong about this stuff. Never.
This is another thing scammers are really good at doing, garnering social proof. Have you ever heard of Bernie Madoff? Bernie was a successful man. He was the founder of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. They wanted this man on SEC advisory committees. He was literally the chairman of the NASDAQ. Bernie was Wall Street. But he's probably more commonly known as the perpetrator of the largest Ponzi scheme in history, one worth $65 billion. Bernie's firm had two main components. The first was legitimate for the most part, a stock brokerage that would act as a middleman between those who wanted to buy and those who wanted to sell stocks. And at the firm's most successful, they were handling 1 in every 10 trades on the New York Stock Exchange. The second part of Bernie's business was the fraudulent one. He would take in investor money, tell them that he'll invest it for them, and then tell them that they're making phenomenal returns. In actuality, he did nothing with the money. It just sat there in a big pile, partially for his own use. And if anyone ever wanted to cash out, he'd just give it to him from the pool. The scam was fairly simple, but it wasn't very simple to discover, as Bernie ran his Ponzi scheme for over 30 years. Throughout these 30 years, his stock brokerage became insanely successful. He was investigated multiple times by the SEC. He sat as the chairman of the NASDAQ, the second largest stock exchange in the world. Bernie was not an ordinary investment manager. He was powerful. His firm was huge. His name carried weight. People trusted him so much they wanted his input on market regulation. Hell, you had Bernie hanging out with the owner of the New York Mets. Surely the owner of the New York Mets would not be such close friends with a potential fraudster. Well, it seems like Fred Wilpon, the owner of the New York Mets, also thought the same thing, until he had to sell the team to cover the fallout. It's not like no one could have called out that Bernie Madoff was running a massive scam. People did over and over and over, but either willfully or due to ignorance, their voices never made it that far. For any layman looking at Bernie, it just wouldn't make sense. He just had too much social proof. How could you realistically doubt him without looking like a conspiracy theorist? Not to mention that no one really likes dissenters, which is even more true now than when Bernie was around. Investing has gone from being a closely analyzed and thoughtful debate to something more akin to sports team loyalty, rather than people meeting somewhere in the middle to discuss the pros and the cons, the merits and the downsides. It seems like people are more keen on picking their side based on vibes and group loyalty, taking a harsh stance, and deciding to die on that hill. Interestingly, I would say this is probably some sort of reflection of modern day politics. Your stance on these things has become foundational to your very personality and identity. Take a look at Dr. Michael Burry. Now, for those of you who don't know him, he's an incredibly successful and well-known trader. Nowadays, he writes a newsletter sharing his predictions of the financial world and exactly how he comes to his conclusions. It seems like every single time Dr. Burry dares to hold a negative sentiment about something or questions its long-term viability, you have an army of people coming to try and discredit him, to the point where the majority of the time I hear about him, it's to imply he's stupid. Now, usually when I hear a sentiment like this, I want to give it a fair shot. So I started researching, looking at every critique of him that I could find, and over again I saw the same things, people arguing against straw mans of his argument, things he had never said before, or people completely misunderstanding his analysis and then being mad at a conclusion he never made. Now, I'm not saying that Dr. Burry himself cannot be wrong. Of course he can. All I'm saying is that the people that are criticizing him in 99% of cases are not actually qualified to do so. These are not basic writings. It's not like a YouTube video script. This is in-depth financial analysis, and the responses aren't valid, in-depth criticism. For the most part, it sounds like, well, Dr. Burry. You criticize the thing I like, and therefore you are nitpicking and biased. The greatest and worst part about internet discourse is that all of a sudden, everyone has a seat at the table. Sometimes it's hard to tell who actually knows what they're talking about and who doesn't, because they're all so confident. Anyways, as I mentioned before, Dr. Michael Burry is known for having some insane predictions, like having predicted the economic collapse of 2008 before it occurred. And there's a lot we can learn from looking back at that. You've probably seen The Big Short. If you haven't, you should probably go watch it. So I'm not going to give you a step-by-step rundown exactly how the 2008 economic collapse actually occurred. Instead, I'm going to give you an oversimplified refresher on the most important part, at least for our analysis here. Banks, the big safe institution where you lock all your money, the place that is supposed to be the least shadiest source of financial advice. Well, they were selling garbage. By garbage, I mean that they were representing moderately risky, maybe even extremely risky assets as unshakable AAA ratings. They were treating them like guaranteed investments. Surprise, surprise, things were not as guaranteed as they represented to the customers. And ultimately, this led to a massive economic collapse. Why were they doing this? Well, banks were making a lot of money selling the garbage, and so were the bankers. Now, if The Big Short was your only source of information for this, you may believe that nobody faced consequences. That's not entirely true. The corporations at large did face consequences. They had to pay some fees. There was some reform that was supposed to protect people. Some banks even just entirely dissolved.
Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old firm, filed for bankruptcy. Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
Despite the actual institution suffering, the CEO executives who knew what was happening but instead used the opportunity to line their own pockets, well, they safely retreated. Why are we talking about this? Well, you may think that the world has changed since then, but I would argue otherwise. Banks are bigger than they've ever been before. People are starting to trust the institutions again, but the problem is, in my opinion, they never got better. You walk into the bank, and there's a high chance that if you have any money sitting in your account, they will try their best to pressure you into investing. Well, if it's just sitting there, you're losing money to inflation. You might as well do something with it. So they'll show you these numbers and charts and portfolios that are supposed to be low to moderate risk. They'll show you record returns. They'll talk about diversification. What they won't tell you is that a lot of these portfolios seem to be a bit too highly leveraged in the tech sector. A lot of their growth is carried by the record-breaking growth of Nvidia, who, as we all know, is growing as their hardware becomes more and more valuable in the creation of massive, numerous data centers across the country. What do these data centers power? Well, they power AI. What they won't tell you is that there's an unprecedented debate on whether AI is all just a bubble or not, and your investments, although obscured behind different layers, are in reality partially a bet in this AI bubble, whether it'll pop or not, and if it does, when it will. Maybe the worst part is that there might be a significant chance that the advisor who is shilling you this product may not even understand what they're selling you, because their job in reality does not exist solely for your betterment. No, they never worked for you. They worked for the bank, and they worked for the betterment of the bank's bottom line. My point is that once again, to participate in investing, you have to trust somebody, but there really isn't a safe bet. Putting your money on the blockchain obviously isn't safe. Putting your money in the hands of investment advisors isn't safe. Trusting institutions like the bank also probably isn't safe. And if the past few years have made something evident, even our own government cannot be trusted to look out for you. Look at the massive amounts of accusations of insider trading, from senators all the way up to the president himself. Avoiding scams starts to seem like a Herculean task. Nobody is trustworthy, and everything could be a scam. But at the same time, you have to put your trust in something to participate in society. You could just try not investing in anything at all, but then you have to reason with the fact that you are constantly losing money to inflation. It's hard not to feel hopeless and jaded. To avoid scams, you have to walk around with your guard up at all times. If you let it down for even a second, you might just become a victim. Someone is going to tell you that you deserved it. Who are these victims anyways? The ones that we all seem to think are just so naive and gullible, unlike us. Well, let's talk about them. I think the first most important thing to acknowledge is that the victims can be insufferable. Just because someone is a victim of a scam does not mean that they have to be an incredible person. Logan Paul himself pointed this out about some of the victims of CryptoZoo.
What will I say to Logan Paul and his team if I could? I will actually use that right to tell him this story again and see how he reacts when he sees that my family, my whole family and my kid are affected with this situation.
And surely you knew Emilio, the gentleman who supposedly let his child invest in a cryptocurrency, was allegedly responsible for 2 rug pulls before you interviewed him.
Beyond sometimes being literal criminals, they can be very defensive. Trying to explain to a victim that they're falling into a trap can be like trying to give a drowning person a life raft while they refuse. We hold a preconceived notion of who the victims of certain scams are, and it's easy to get stuck on this characterization. In the case of people like Logan Paul, people imagine it to be some stupid Logan Paul fans, people so idiotic that it's hard to be empathetic for them. The thing is that this is completely divorced from the point. It doesn't really matter, because for every negative characterization you can make, there's somebody incredibly kind, wholesome, charitable, and who didn't deserve it in the slightest. She even baked you cookies. What do you mean she deserved to be scammed? It's painfully obvious when you think about it that no one really deserves to be scammed, no matter how naive or gullible they were, or how obvious the scam was. Why are we focusing on discrediting the victims when the perpetrator is right there? Well, actually, why do we do that? I can see a few reasons, or maybe it's a combination of them all. Partially, I can see it stemming from some jaded wolves versus sheep ideology that's intrinsically ingrained within us from the cultural zeitgeist.
There are wolves and sheep in this world, kid. Wolves and sheep. Figure out which one you're gonna be.
To admit that a scam could have been something you yourself could fall for, you would be admitting that you're one of the sheep. Instead, being cautious and potentially recognizing the scam before it happens vindicates us. You know, that was obvious. I never would have fallen for that. I'm not one of the sheep, I'm one of the wolves. It's reassuring. On another note, it's becoming increasingly common for the newer generation to feel separated from even this possibility of investing. Everything's so expensive while wages are low. Accumulation feels impossible, so it's difficult to really feel empathy when you can't identify yourself with the victims. If I don't even have any money to invest, I'm too busy using it to try and survive my day-to-day life. Why would I be able to put myself in the shoes of someone who had enough significant savings to think about making returns on it? And maybe the last reason is that we don't expect these scams to ever go away. We don't think society as a whole can get better. You may think that the only way to truly protect yourself is to do it yourself, and that's why you assign it all to personal responsibility. Hold on. Before we begin targeting each other, I think it's paramount to consider the actual beneficiaries of this ideology. Who benefits if we convince ourselves that we have a responsibility for impossible levels of diligence, and that if we fall for a scam, it's all our fault? Well, that's to the benefit of the scammers. I think people like Logan Paul or Sam Bankman-Fried or the small fry trickle-down beneficiaries of a system created to benefit those above them. I wouldn't really say it's a conspiracy theory at this point to understand that an elite class exists significantly above the rest of us, one that plays by different rules, one that can seemingly get away with pretty much anything. I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that they probably have a hand in this sort of media that gets passed down to the masses.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Extremely dangerous
to our democracy.
Extremely dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
I mean, class solidarity, workers' rights, and collectivist ideals have been framed as this evil socialist and communist agenda. It's capitalism, you idiot. We don't look out for each other. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a dog-eat-dog world. But we're not dogs. We don't live in this sort of wild world where the only way I can succeed is by stepping on you. It doesn't have to be you against the world. We do live in a society where we can help each other, a society where the entire point is that we can take care of our sick and our weak, even our less intelligent friends, rather than having to throw them to the wolves. This idea of they deserve it doesn't exist only in scamming, of course. When you think about it, it's everywhere. It's how people talk about homelessness, as if the only people who fall into homelessness entirely deserved it themselves.
He has a traumatic experience and got him here in one way or another. Something very, very traumatic has gotten him here. And to get out of that here, it's not an easy task.
It's how we talk about addicts. It's how they justify pathetic levels of regulation about gambling. They've convinced people that it's unintelligent people who fall for the lows of gambling addiction. Surely, the direct correlation between the legalization of sports betting, the creation of prediction markets, the rise of online gambling, and the rise in gambling addiction surely means nothing.
They'll make the argument that they're just addicted to their phone, and our app just happens to be on it.
I don't believe that the
there is an addiction to mobile betting any more than there is an addiction to utilization of your phone for any other reason.
Every single time someone rich and powerful does something bad, the fault will somehow be reassigned to the middle class. There's an obvious power in our numbers, and the rich and powerful fear more than ever that we point the finger the right way, but they're really good at making sure we don't do that. Now, I've been struggling with this idea for a while, specifically what the solution would be if my proposition is true, and are things gonna get any better? It's hard to call. Trump's second term has truly been unprecedented, regardless of what side of the political aisle you lean on. We've watched them blatantly commit fraud via insider trading, continue to deflect and drag their feet on the Epstein files, start wars the American people are very unsure and angry about, etc., etc. And while it has mattered to some people, I've still seen others so stuck in this us versus them mentality that they'll go to any lengths to defend the actions of the administration. And it's not just the United States. Other countries are having their own unprecedented times. The province of Alberta is trying to legally separate from Canada. Maybe one of the most baffling ideas I've ever heard over the course of my life. Regardless, it's undeniable overall that people are angry, and usually anger is a precursor to catalyzing great change. The midterms will probably be a good indicator, but until then, I remain uncertain. To end this video off, I want to talk about what, in my opinion, is a less obvious modern day scam. This is Jeff Walton, the Chief Risk Officer of Strive, one of the companies selling new Bitcoin-backed perpetual preferred stocks. This is CoffeeZilla, a great detective with a focus on exposing crypto scams. They're going at it in this head-to-head debate over the merits of these specific crypto-related perpetual preferred stocks, with Coffee being extremely skeptical of the longevity of these assets, their ability to pay yields, currently at 13% in perpetuity. Now Jeff is smart. He counters this with complicated jargon, mentions of underwriting. He says, "Where's the math? Coffee, why didn't you bring the math?" Anything to distract from the core issues Coffee has here. It's so obvious to me, yet the comments seem to fall for the smoke and mirrors. When you look past the smoke and mirrors, you can actually see what's going on. Strive and contemporaries market their product as money market-like, comparing their product to what is essentially the safest financial instrument next to cash. But as I mentioned, they are Bitcoin backed. The company doesn't really earn money to pay the dividend by generating income through business activities. It's new investors coming into the product that gives them money to pay the dividend. The problem is that this means their ability to pay the dividend is largely based on investor sentiment, which works until investors lose faith in their stability. Well, what if Bitcoin dramatically drops and they're one of the largest Bitcoin holders in the world? What if their USD reserve as of May is only $871 million, just enough to cover about 9 months of dividend payments? What if Bitcoin just doesn't end up being as revolutionary as they may hope? Its existence and potential is unprecedented and incalculable. Well, Jeff will disagree. He'll say they've actually done the calculation.
But you asked me to show you the math. Do you think it's realistic for Bitcoin to cost $36 million in 2076?
Yes. Yes, undeniably, yes. Absolutely.
Now tell me, does a safe investment to you sound like one that relies on Bitcoin going up 13% in perpetuity up to 36 million per Bitcoin and beyond? It sounds like baloney to me. Albeit, I'll concede that Jeff's financial experience definitely surpasses my own. I guess at the end of the day, only time can tell. Just remember, even if you do get scammed, you didn't deserve it. Wow, great work! You made it to the end of the video, and that makes you my favorite viewer. If you liked what you saw, check out these videos, and subscribe.